It's probably the biggest, most universal question we ever ask ourselves. It's the kind of thing that can keep you up at night, the kind of question that can define a whole lifetime of searching. Why are we here? In this explainer, we're going to dive into a Buddhist perspective that doesn't just try to answer that question, it completely transforms it.
So let's just start right there, with that one huge question. Why were we born? It feels like it should have some grand cosmic answer, right? A specific purpose, a master plan laid out just for us. But what if I told you the Buddhist perspective we're exploring today suggests something, well, pretty radical? What if the search for why is actually the wrong search to begin with?
All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll tackle the big question itself. Then, we'll get into a really cool analogy that totally shifts our perspective. After that, we'll look at what's called the fuel of our existence, see how that fuel creates a new life, and finally, land on what this teaching says is the most worthwhile goal we could possibly have. All right, Section 1, Life's Big Question. We're not going to tiptoe around this. We are diving straight into the deep end, right into the heart of this existential query that has fascinated and, let's be honest, frustrated people for, well, forever. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. This approach doesn't just hand you a simple, neat answer. Instead, the teaching comes from a Buddhist master who uses this brilliant analogy to suggest that maybe, just maybe, we've been asking the wrong question all along. And that, right there, leads us perfectly into Section 2, Change the Question, Change Perspective. This is the real game changer. This is the pivot point for this whole way of thinking. And believe it or not, it all comes down to a super simple analogy about the sun.
Okay, so look at this slide. It lays it out perfectly. Asking why does the sun shine is just like asking why was I born? I mean, you could get lost in deep philosophy or astrophysics, but the sun itself isn't going to give you a reason. The far more useful, more powerful question is, okay, the sun is shining, so what should I do now, right? Do I grab some sunscreen? Do I go for a walk? The power shifts from some cosmic why to a very real, very present what now.
So really, the takeaway here is huge. The idea is to redirect all that energy we spend wrestling with the unanswerable why, and instead focus it on the immediate reality of our lives. We're here. Now what? What do we choose to do with this moment?
Okay, so that brings us to Section 3. Because even if why is the wrong question, there's still a how, right? How does this whole thing work? And Buddhism actually offers a very clear, almost mechanical explanation for how we come into existence. And at the absolute core of that how is this big idea, cause and effect. The thinking here is that nothing is random. Our birth, this life, every single thing we experience, it's all an effect that grows out of a whole web of previous causes and conditions. Our existence isn't just some one-off event. It's a single link in a massive, unbroken chain. So that leads to a pretty obvious question, doesn't it? If our being born is an effect, then what's the specific cause? What's the engine? What's the fuel for this engine that keeps the process of life going?
And the answer, according to this teaching, is surprisingly simple and direct: craving. The ancient term is tanha. Now, we're not talking about a casual want, like craving a slice of pizza. This is a deep, fundamental thirst. It's that relentless wanting for things to be pleasant, pushing away things that are unpleasant, that restless energy that always wants life to be just a little bit different than it is. This intense mental energy is seen as the very seed, the fuel, that literally propels consciousness forward into a new life.
So, okay, how does that actually work? How does this craving go from being a feeling in your mind to generating a whole new life? That's what we're getting into in Section 4. Let's trace that journey.
Well, it's described as this kind of chain reaction. It all starts with Step 1. That powerful craving we just talked about pops up. Then, Step 2. This craving makes the mind latch onto something. It attaches to an object. Could be a person, a feeling, an idea. Then, and this is the amazing part, Step 3, that intense mental attachment actually creates what's called a bhava, which is basically a realm or a plane of existence. And finally, Step 4, once that realm is formed, consciousness springs up inside it, and just like that, a new life begins. And what's really wild is that the type of craving you have is said to shape the type of world you're born into. So, for example, really intense cravings connected to your senses, taste, touch, all that, might lead to a rebirth in what's called a sensory realm. But more subtle cravings, like being attached to a deep state of meditation, could lead to these more refined realms of pure form or even formless existence. The key idea is, The fuel you use determines your destination.
So that brings us all the way back around, full circle, to that big, practical question. We're here, we kind of see the mechanics of how we got here, so what is the absolute most worthwhile thing we can do with this life? That's our final section.
And the answer given here is, well, it's huge. It's incredibly clear. The highest, most noble quest is to seek nirvana, a state that's described as deathlessness. Now hold on, this isn't about physical immortality. It's not about living forever in this body. It means reaching a state that is completely beyond the cycle of death and rebirth itself. It's about ending the whole process.
So the ultimate purpose just flips that original question right on its head. The goal isn't to figure out the reason we got on this cosmic ride in the first place. The goal is to skillfully learn how to get off the ride. It's about extinguishing the fuel, that craving, that Tanya, so that the engine of rebirth just stops.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. That sounds massive, right? To end a cycle that's been going for who knows how long. So if that's the goal, where in the world do you even begin? What's the absolute first step you could possibly take? Well, the teaching is really clear on this. The starting point isn't some grand gesture. It's knowledge. Specifically, it's about understanding what are called the Four Noble Truths. You can think of these truths as the fundamental map for the entire journey. It's like the "You Are Here" sticker on the map of reality, showing you exactly where you are, what the problem is, and which way to go. And so that leaves us with one last, really powerful question to think about. We've shifted our focus from "Why am I here?" to "What should I do?" We now know the goal is to be free from the cycle, and we know the first step is to gain a certain kind of knowledge. So the real question becomes, what truths about our own existence do we need to understand to even begin the most noble quest of all?